Okay, so second talk today, which is about some and all and same and different and forever and for a short space of time. And basically the final thing is what's on the tin versus what's in the tin. And the idea here is basically a while ago I read some things. I won't say I've read his book because it's quite a dense read, about a chap called Ignacio, I'm not sure, pardon my Spanish pronunciation, Matt Blanco, who was a Chilean psychoanalyst and psychiatrist. And basically he had some, what for me were very interesting ideas, which was he drew a distinction between two kinds of thinking, which he called symmetrical and asymmetrical thinking. And symmetrical thinking is all, same, forever, and asymmetrical thinking is some, different, and for a short space of time. And the idea that Ignacio Blanco had was that the subconscious, he's a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, so he's interested in the subconscious. The subconscious favours one over the other, and the one that it favours is the same, all, forever way of thinking. And in this idea of symmetrical and asymmetrical, also there's, of course, this idea of mirroring and not mirroring, which is where I get this idea of what it says on the tin and what's in the tin. So basically, for the symmetrical way of thinking, the idea is, the kind of tendency is to think that what's in the tin is a direct mapping, a direct reflection of what's written on the tin. So the biscuits in the tin are a direct reflection of what's written on the tin. Whereas an asymmetrical way of thinking acknowledges that there can be a difference between a description of something and the actual thing itself. So the problem of how anything that's in the world could actually match in any way to a description which is written. So how can the biscuits in the tin match the description that's written on the outside of the tin? The problem with this is, if you think about it for a second, this is the kind of thing that you do when you're doing a philosophy degree. I did a philosophy degree. If you think about it for a second, then you start to realise, well, this is really strange, isn't it? Because one thing is, it's some noises or some marks. If we're using the biscuit tin example, it's some marks on the side of the biscuit tin, and then the thing that's in the tin is some biscuits, right? So it's flour and sugar and fat and flavouring, etc. These are not the same thing. How could one match to the other? So part of the way of symmetrical thinking is to think that this is not problematic. This is straightforward. That you can have something written on the side of the tin, and the thing that's in the tin will match it. Why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about this in relation to project management, and especially software development project management? Well, the reason is that basically, I suppose the scales dropped from my eyes in a way when I realised about this tendency to think about things in a symmetrical way versus the possibility of thinking about things in an asymmetrical way. And especially kind of in the areas where the symmetrical way of thinking about things doesn't really make much sense, but the point that Ignacio Matt Blanco is making is that's still the way that we kind of initially think about things. We start to think about things in that way, and then maybe on more sober reflection, when we think about things consciously, that kind of way of thinking about things recedes or goes away. And so one of the examples that I kind of want to talk about here is the idea that kind of, so if you think about like what's a very important subject for projects is time. If you ask people what's important for a project going well, probably the first thing that they'll say is on time. And timing in a symmetrical way of thinking is extremely problematic because forever, if the way of thinking about time is forever, basically things can either exist or not exist. They can't come into being when you have a symmetrical way of thinking. Now, as I said, this might sound crazy, but there is this aspect, and if you've worked on any projects, you'll see it, of people who've had the idea for a project, people who want a project, behaving as if, in some sense, the project already exists, the thing already exists, and then kind of being extremely frustrated because, well, it already exists, so why is it taking so long? And also kind of being frustrated about how much it costs. So kind of we've had the idea for this thing, then so this thing exists. Why should it cost so much to pay people to just, I don't know what they think software developers are doing. Typing, digging this thing out, unearthing it, hiding it, and not letting them see it even though it's really there. So, as I said, this is not a way of thinking that's kind of rational, in the kind of sense of being a useful way of thinking about things for project management, but it's a way that you see very often. And another aspect of this that is kind of very, very familiar to anybody who's tried to do things in an agile way, or tried to do things in an iterative way, an incremental way, is that when you say to people, well, we've got a list of things here that you want this software to do, which one would you like us to do first? Their response very often is, well, I just want all of them, so I don't want to come up with any kind of prioritization or ordering them, because I want all of them. And again, I think this is closely related to this idea of once you've thought of the thing, then the thing exists. And also, the thing that I was talking about with the writing on the biscuit tin and the biscuits in the tin. The point here is that if you think that's unproblematic, which, as we kind of know from the Ignacio Blanco idea, that people tend to, their subconscious way of thinking about this is that it is unproblematic, then you're pretty much fine with the idea that you can write down a description of what the project is, and that then that can just be made. So whatever that description of the project is, that can be made into reality. You can write whatever description of biscuits you want on the tin, even if it's contradictory, even if it uses ingredients that don't exist or just can't be accessed, can't be found, and you can then legitimately expect those biscuits to appear in the tin through some kind of process. Whereas if you acknowledge that this is not a straightforward business, that kind of whatever the description is that's on the tin won't match necessarily what's in the real world, and especially the idea that what's in the real world is a different kind of thing. It's not a statement, it's not some words, it's a thing in the real world. Then that's a more useful way of looking at things from the point of view of project management. Also, there's another aspect to this, which is, and it's very odd that this is so difficult to explain, that a description of something isn't as valuable as the thing itself, even if the thing itself doesn't absolutely match the description. So if again we talk about biscuits, in the case of biscuits, if we're hungry, a real biscuit, even if it doesn't match the description that's on the tin, if it's a nourishing biscuit, if it has calories in it and it doesn't kill us, that's a valuable biscuit. And this is something that's extremely difficult to explain. It causes lots and lots of trouble in project management, lots of arguments in project management that are to do with making the thing in the world demonstrably like its description. Why? Why should, I mean, okay, that might be a nice thing to have, but why put enormous amounts of effort into that? And I think the reason is that, like, the explanation is down to the thing that the ideas that Ignacio Matblanco has, and so that's the kind of problem. The problem is there are these two ways of thinking, and we tend towards using one which is not necessarily that helpful in project management. What can we do about it? Well, one of the things that it dawned on me was that this thing called the Agile Manifesto, which is basically a bunch of guys who I think had it with trying to do projects in a traditional fashion, getting together in 2001 in Utah in America and coming up with this 90-some word, I think it's 97 word, and description of how they wanted to approach software development in future. And one of the things that I kind of realized about this is that this is essentially a manifesto that's saying, can we do things in an asymmetrical way? Can we do things in a some different for a short space of time way, rather than in a same all forever type way? And that's kind of really, really interesting. And there are 4 values in the Agile Manifesto. And one project that I ran, I asked people to come up with a mnemonic to help remember the 4 values in the Agile Manifesto, and somebody came up with one so good that I still remember it now, which is "in winter comes Rudolph." And so the I stands for individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And so what that's saying is people make software, individuals, like real people, and they have conversations, and that's how you get software. There isn't some magic process or some magic tools that you can use that will get you your software. We're probably going to have to find this out again because of the whole business with AI, but that's the point that they're making. You're going to have to walk down to the zebra crossing because the traffic's so bad. And so yes, individuals and interactions of processes and tools. Winter, a part of the mnemonic, working software over detailed documentation. Now, notice this. This is saying get something to work. This is a biscuit tin inspired value. So it's saying have something in the biscuit tin that's valuable, rather than an extremely detailed description of what the biscuit should behave like written on the tin. And so in winter comes customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So again, this is kind of wrapping up the first 2. So it's again moving away from a document, the contract, to kind of a conversation, a collaboration with the customer. And then finally, responding to change over following a plan. And again, this is kind of like, this is about noticing the world. So remember, like in a symmetrical time system, nothing can change. Everything is always the same in a symmetrical time system. So this is basically saying things do change, we learn, and that changing and learning is valuable. And again, it's kind of being suspicious of what's written on the tin in relation to what's actually in the tin. So there are these kind of aspects of the Agile Manifesto which are essentially talking about this difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical points of view. And how this actually plays out, how does this actually play out in projects? How do you make projects more likely to succeed as a result of understanding this? And the thing that, like, the real kind of realization that I had was that the way that you do this is by trying to achieve, similarly, as Matblanco said, the whole business of subconscious symmetrical thinking. Essentially what you're doing with Agile is you're trying to get subconscious asymmetrical thinking. You're trying to sneak asymmetrical thinking into the process. 3 ways of doing this, 2 which are kind of major ways, and then 1 which is just like an aside. So one of the main ways that you sneak asymmetrical thinking into the process is by showing people working software, because people respond completely differently to working software than they do to a list of features. They absolutely respond symmetrically to a list of features. They don't respond asymmetrically. But if you show them something that works, then very often what they do is they have a very good idea about the next thing they want it to do. Or if there's one particular part of it, good lord, it's noisy in London, isn't it? If there's one particular part of it that's I'm going to pause as I walk past this guy who's let his car alarm go off. Okay. Yeah, so when people see software, they think asymmetrically. They think, okay, I can see that this is wrong and this needs to be changed, which is an asymmetric thought. It's a sum thought. Or they say, okay, this goes so far, but it misses this thing, or this is the next thing I want to see. So again, that's an asymmetrical thing. And what you're doing by showing them working software and getting them to respond to it asymmetrically is you're kind of subconsciously inviting them to respond asymmetrically, which I think is very interesting. Just an aside there, which is you don't have to be symmetrical about all the asymmetrical things they say. So you don't have to act on everything that they say, but it's really useful information. It's getting them to think asymmetrically. So the other thing that the other kind of main way that you can get people to think asymmetrically and make projects more likely to succeed is by doing user research. So one of the things that we all struggle with is seeing things from other people's point of view. We all struggle with this, and sometimes it's called the curse of knowledge. There's various names for it in psychology. But one of the things that you need to do when you're developing software is to at least see it from some of the users' points of view. And so that's what user research is for. It's for understanding the user's point of view, and also crucially understanding their values. Now, again, there's a great tendency to imagine that everybody has the values that we have, and that's a weakness if you're going through the expense of actually doing a project, because one of the things that you could potentially do as part of the process of a project is to unearth other values, is to find values that you can respond to with your software that you didn't even know people had. And so this is kind of the other half. It's the other part of the whole business of making projects more likely. I've gone on for 18 minutes, so I'm just going to go with one final thing, which is basically that people who do have the same point of view, it's much easier to make somebody who has the point of view that you have believe you. And in the book I tell an elaborate, long, shaggy dog story of a joke, the punchline of which is, from a whorehouse to a whorehouse is a local call. And that's the idea of this. It's like, from a whorehouse to a whorehouse, it's a local call. If you're talking to somebody who has the same point of view as you, it's much easier to persuade them of what you're trying to tell them. And so one of the things that you can do when you're working on a project is to involve people in the project in such a way, so involve people who you want to persuade, or you want them to persuade other people inside their organization of a certain point of view in the project, so that they see all these asymmetrical things, they see all these wrinkles and non-standard, non-specific things, and then they can explain those to other people who will trust them in a way that they'd never trust you.